Welcome everybody to Paleo Talks. I think this is actually episode 45. Is that correct? We're on 45 now. I believe so. Or is it 46? We don't know, do we?
This is 45.
I can't
It
count
really
that
is
high.
45. So exciting to be coming to you. And today we have a very special guest, actually from Chile, Natalia Villavicencio. And yes, so happy to have you. And we'll get back to introducing you in just a second. We'd like to start by telling everybody how the show works. David, if you could do that.
Absolutely. So Paleo Talks follows a pretty familiar format at this point. In just a minute, we're going to start with Blaine and our guest, Natalia, introducing, Natalia, and then starting the presentation. And then once the presentation is done, the whole rest of the program is going to be Q&A with the audience. So our panel might have a few questions, but at that point, we're also going to take questions from you. So we'll remind you to put your questions in the comments of the Facebook video for us to read out. And as always, if you can't leave a comment on Facebook for some reason, you can head over to the Gray Fossil Site Twitter or Instagram account. I'll be keeping an eye on those too, so you can send us questions there.
All right, thank you, David. And we also have Chris Widga with us again today. Looks like he's in at the office. And we're coming to you from the Center of Excellence in Paleontology at East Tennessee State University in Johnson City. I'm actually somewhere in Kentucky on the road. So the center is expanding today, and we're expanding all the way to Chile. And so happy again to have you with us to be able to talk about some of your work that's going on in South America, Natalia. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm doing well, yeah.
Oh, all right, fantastic. Well, we like to start the program, Natalia, with just learning a little bit more about you and how you became a paleontologist in the first place. So what was that road, what was that path that led you into paleontology? And then how did you end up at Berkeley, and then eventually now back in Chile? So sort of give us that path.
Okay, so yeah, I'm from Chile, and my background is in biology. I studied biology here at the Universidad Católica in Santiago. And yeah, I guess I was always interested in ecology since I was little. I went to biology to study ecology, and also always interested in past life. So at the university, there is one lab working in paleoecology, and I went to work there as an undergrad with Claudio Latorre. He was my supervisor. And we worked actually at the Atacama Desert. I started doing paleoecology at the Atacama, working mainly with plants and trying to understand the past climate, the recent past climate of the Atacama. And then I went to Berkeley. I also always wanted to study abroad, to spend some time in another country, learning another language. And I met Tony Barnowski here in Chile as an undergrad. He was doing a sabbatical here. And I applied to do my PhD in his lab. So that worked fine. And it was at Berkeley where I started to working in megafaunal extinctions. And that has been my study subject for the last maybe 10 years. I don't know, a lot of time. Yeah.
Once you get into the megafauna, it's hard to get out again.
Yeah.
There's so much to do, and it's so interesting.
Yeah, it is.
So the project that you're going to talk about today, you became interested in that when you were a student in Chile, and then now you're back to working in the same area again?
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I became familiar with the Atacama as an undergrad, but while I was at Berkeley, it was that the team working in this area started finding some megafauna remains. So when I came back, I went to work with them again in those findings. And that's what I'm gonna show here, yeah.
All right, well, let's go over to your presentation then. I know you have Some really beautiful slides. We all travel there.
Okay. Okay, it looks fine, right? Yeah.
Yeah, looks great. Go ahead and get started.
Yeah, so yeah, I started with a very nice picture of high Andean lakes. This is Chungaray in northern Chile. And what I'm gonna talk about today is about some findings of last ice age mammals, megafauna in the Atacama Desert, and just a little bit about what we know, or what I know, about megafauna in the Andean Highlands. So I guess many of you in this audience are familiar with the fact that not long ago, during the late Pleistocene, the world was inhabited for a great variety of megafauna that doesn't exist anymore. So for example, in Australia, there was this kind of landscape with giant mammals. In Eurasia, the same thing with woolly mammoths and rhinoceros and horses. And in the Americas, it was the same. So every corner of the world was inhabited for a diversity of giant mammals that don't exist anymore. And most of them became extinct in what is known as the late Quaternary extinction, where the biggest representatives of the mammalian clades in every continent became extinct. And some of them survived. So for example, here we have in these different colors, those that became extinct in black for every continent, and the ones that survived. And the exception of this extinction seems to be Africa, which is the place where we still find the largest mammals. And in this context, South America, which is part of my, it's the place I know the best. South America was greatly affected. It lost over an 80% of all the large mammals weighing over 45 kilograms, became extinct. And in this, with these pictures, I'm just showing all the survivors, which they seem a lot, but they are not as many as there were present during the late Pleistocene in the continent. And during the late Pleistocene, we had a great diversity with very strange shapes, I would say. The Xenarthrans, of course, with giant ground sloths and giant cingulates. And also some very particular forms, the notoungulates, the ungulates from the south, represented here by Toxodon and Macrauchenia, for example. And I'm gonna now go in shrinking from a continental or a world view to Chile, which is the example I'm gonna talk about today. So Chile is this long, narrow country located in this part of South America. And 10,000 years ago, during the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene, Chile was inhabited by a great diversity of large mammals. So we had gomphotheres that looked like elephants, right? We had Leptotherms, Macrauchenia, several species of giant ground sloths, some horses, giant bears. This is for you, Blaine. and many other animals living. In this map, I show the fossil localities known for Chile so far. And from these localities is that we know about this diversity. And at present, we have only a few of them left. Just one big carnivore, the puma, or the mountain lion, a couple of native camelids, the vicuña and the guanaco, and 2 cervids, and that's it. And maybe going more to the Atacama Desert, just here to show that there are fewer records of late Pleistocene megafauna for the Atacama of Chile compared to the rest of the country, maybe, especially like the central Chile. And just a bit of context. So the Atacama is this area that looks drier, right, in this part of the continent. It goes from, I would say, 28 degrees to the north. It covers some places in Peru in the coast, also Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. And the driest part of the Atacama, where actually it rains nothing over the year, is located in northern Chile, which is the absolute desert. Let me see. Oh, and from the fossil sites that have been identified in the Atacama, we know the presence of all these different taxa. There are findings from at least 2 to 3 species of ground sloths, some of them giant as Megatherium and others smaller. Also the presence of guanaco and vicuña, which are still present in some areas in the landscape, but also some extinct representatives of the camelids. Macrauchinia, there are some findings. Maybe Gomphotheres, that's with a question mark because there are some like records in the literature, but they need to be revised, and also horses. So more specifically in the Atacama, I'm gonna be talking about Pampa del Tamarugal, which is located in northern Chile, in this area. Here the line shows the limits of the basin of Pampa del Tamarugal. And the name of this place is given by the presence of tamarugos, which are these trees. At present, in a very small area of this basin, we still find forests of tamarugo, Prosopis tamarugo, which are these trees forming like a forest. There are some towns around this area. But basically, the rest of the basin is pretty dry. And these trees are fed by underground water. They have long roots and they survive there because there is underground water in the area. And more specifically in the basin of Pampa del Tamarugal, these are just names of different towns. This is a national park, Pampa del Tamarugal National Park. We are working in an area located to the south named Quebrada Mani, which at present looks like this. So it's the absolute desert in many, many places. Here there is another picture where, yes, you can see some traps isolated in places where sometimes there is some runoff water, but basically it's pretty dry. And long time ago, I guess this was during the time I was an undergrad here in Chile. Some prospective work led us to find some vegetation remains in what is today the absolute desert. Some of them look like this, so they are basically trunks of old trees that were present in the area at some point in the past. And when they are radiocarbon dated, they give ages that are late Pleistocene ages in general. This particular one was around 17,000 years. Oh, it's in Spanish, antes del presente, but before present. And like gathering more information along this canyon of Quebrada Mani and other canyons like in the neighboring area, like led us to find a lot of remains in different shapes. So this images are from a paper that was published in 2012. And for example, here you can see all the area that was a tree and all the leaves falling at some point. You can find the trunks, but basically there are many leaves that now look like this. And also more like branches and like many remains of trees. And radiocarbon dating those remains led these researchers to identify two moments where the landscape had these trees living and present. It has this tamarugo forest in the area. So here in this figure, we have time in this axis, in the lower axis, and these are different records of wet phases in the central Atacama or in the central Andes that are inferred from many different types of proxies. So for example, these wet phases are identified by the size of these ancient lakes that today are salt flats. This is the Uyuni salt flat, like the giant one located in Bolivia, that at some point was a lake and it was bigger or smaller. Also, rat middens are used as a proxy as they record changes in body size of the rodents that made these rat middens, and also changes in the vegetation that was around that led the researchers to know wetter or drier periods in the Atacama. And also the dates on these vegetation remains I showed. So this image shows that in the central Andes and in the Atacama, there were two wet phases at the end of the Pleistocene.
Natalia?
Yes?
So I was excited to see that rodent midden. It looks a lot like a pack rat midden there, and it looks like it's indurated and somewhat solid. Is it a different type of rodent than what we typically find? Do you happen to know what kind of rodent is doing that?
Yeah, so I think people have identified maybe 2 to 3 species of rodents that make these middens. One is the genus Abrocoma, which is like a tiny ball.
Yeah.
The other one is even a tinier one, a Philotis, that also might be present gathering some of these plants and making middens. And these cachas too, like the large ones. But
and are they putting
Abrocoma.
these? Okay, are they putting these into rocky areas, into alcoves, just like pack rats do? Oh,
usually in rock shelters and they're very similar. I saw some pack rat middens at the Barnowski lab in Berkeley, and they smell the same. They look very similar. Yeah.
They taste the same, probably too.
Yeah, probably. But it's a very nice record. And so we have these two wet events, one between May 18,000 to 500,000 years before present. Then there is a dry period and then another wet event between 13,000 and around 10,000 years before present. And these wet events were also recorded in Pampa del Tamarugal with all these plant remains radiocarbon dated around those wet periods. So the identification of this forest that once was present in this canyon led people to the next step that was, I'm sorry. So these are some of the species that have been identified. We have the tamarugo, which is the large tree, but also some smaller trees and shrubs as well, and horsetail That's horsetail. How you call it in the ecosystem? You know about plants? No? Horsetail something. I think it's just
Yeah.
horsetail. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like horsetail.
Yeah. So all this system was a wetland with abundant water, underground water as well. And yeah, I guess something like these pictures at some point during the late Pleistocene. So the next step was to start looking for archaeological sites in the area. So we know that humans probably entered South America around 14 to 16,000 years before present. And the idea was to look, okay, where these humans may be living in what is today the absolute desert, when there was a forest, or when there was water in the area. And this picture shows here people doing some archaeological excavations in this area. And here are some more pictures of these sites. The name is Quebrada Mani 12, where actually they found one of the oldest archaeological sites known for the Atacama Desert, with all the evidence, bones, and a toolkit, and a fire-like place, and this one is dated around 12,800 years before present, close to 13,000 years before present. And like the continuing exploration of these canyons led us to find a place where a lot of megafauna remains are like coming out. So this is the canyon. This is the archaeological site I talked about. And if you keep going down, there is this area where a lot of megafauna, extinct megafauna remains have been found. And they look a bit like this. They are not the greatest fossils, I would say, but they are coming out in place. This is what was at some point maybe a complete skeleton of a Megatherium, probably. But yeah, it looks like this. So they are not the greatest, but we have been able to recover some remains that are identifiable. So we know, for example, that there was some Megatherium. These are more remains, like a large bone, some horses too. They are articulated, and they were quite complete at some point, like this one. And some elements are nice and identifiable. These, for example, were some molars that are completely destroyed and in place. Taking out these fossils has been a challenge, and many of them are still in the ground, because we were actually expecting a colleague from Mexico that she would come and help us to take the fossils in good shape, but COVID happened and that wasn't possible anymore. Also some canids, and this is an interesting finding in place, and here's the whole thing. Because canids are not pretty common in the fossil record of Chile, and for the Atacama there is none up to now. We are now writing this paper, but this is like a new finding for Chile, and also some camels, and this would be the diversity we have been able to identify from these remains. There are guanacos, which are still present, but in the high part of the Andes. A canid that is still in debt until the publication comes out. Some giant ground sloths, horses, and also little tiny rodents. This is Abrocoma, actually, the one that makes the pack rats. And this is a tenomys that is today present in the place where the forest of Tamarugos is, but not in this super dry area. And this is just to show how many localities, this is in Spanish, I'm sorry, but how many localities for the different groups have been identified and how many elements. So yeah, like for example, equids, horses, there are many scattered bones here and there. Many localities with 1 or 2 bones. The same for camelids, and also quite a few megatherium, I would say. Maybe 4 to 5 spots with megatherium. Well, you saw that the preservation of the bones is not very good. So I have attempted several times to get some collagen out of the bones, and that's impossible. And I think we are gonna move to try to get some apartheid dates just to have an idea of when these animals were present. Up to now, there are no bones of extinct megafauna coming from the archaeological excavations, so we cannot say anything about the interaction between humans and this fauna. Usually from the excavations, what is present is small rodents, some birds, and guanaco, the camelids. But yeah, and we have some dates, for example, for archaeological sites in the area that are usually located on top of these tiny hills that you can see. There are some dates for black mats and other proxies of the presence of the wetland in the area, but no dates for the bones. And we don't know, it's a very complex system, so we don't know what was the original position of the bones in the stratigraphy, or yeah, it's a work in progress. But previous to this work, it was known for the basin of Pampa del Tamarugal, the presence of these taxa. So Megatherium and Celidodon or Catonyx, which are giant ground sloths, were known from fossil collections that are at the museum here in Santiago and that were recovered at some point when people were digging wells in the towns. These are the small towns in the area, like or building a road, and these bones came out. And actually, as a graduate student, I was able to get 1 radiocarbon date from those collections for a Megatherium that is dated around 14,000 years before present. I also tried some other bones and they didn't work, but I guess we have to go back to these museum collections and see if we can get more dates. But the findings in Quebrada Beni improve a lot our knowledge about the diversity in the area during the late Pleistocene. Now we have a more diverse assemblage for the area with horses and more Megatherium and even some smaller fauna that we know that was present during the late Pleistocene in the area. And I'm going to talk just a bit about the highlands, also from a work I did as a graduate student, just to show maybe what we know about this the possibility of interaction between humans and extinct megafauna and what we can know from the area in general. So when I was, I'm going to talk about some findings in Casa del Diablo, Peru. This is just a picture to show how the place looks like today. These are different caves located quite high in the Andes, like over 3,000 meters above sea level, at least. And what I did as a graduate student was to go to a museum in Sweden, actually, where these very, very nice preserved fossils were located. That Nordenskjöld, he was an ethnographer, took out from this cave, Casa del Diablo, and took them to Sweden, to the museum at his home country. So the bones were very, very nicely preserved, and we were able to get collagen and to radiocarbon date some of these bones. And also, plus that information we make, there were some radiocarbon dates already known from some sites in the high Andes of Peru. And also we know of, maybe one date from the Atacama of Chile, but a little bit lower in elevation. And this is just the chronology of extinction. This is the way we place all these radiocarbon dates. Here's the date of the different bones and proxies. And we compare the presence of these megafauna with the presence of humans in the area that comes from archaeological records, and different changes in vegetation, other proxies for the presence of megafauna, Sporormiella, from a high Andean lake. And these are the two wet events that are recorded for the high Andes and the Atacama. So I think one of the conclusions from this graph, there are no many dates, so there is not a lot we can say, I think. But yeah, we have a diverse assemblage of fauna. These are all from Casa del Diablo, for example, with horses, camelids, also smaller fauna, giant ground sloths, all of them from this cave. But there seem to be, like, I don't know if they coexisted in the same area with humans. So it seems from this data that when humans arrive to the highlands, these are only radiocarbon dates for archaeological sites above 3,000 meters of elevation in the Andes. It seems that they were probably gone, according to this data, when humans arrived. And actually, there is no evidence of bones of extinct fauna in any of these archaeological sites. The only example I can think of is one site in the Atacama of Chile, a bit south, where there is one fossil of Equide indeed in an archaeological site, but there are no more. So it's still an open question. I think, yeah, I think they didn't coexisted, and actually that this fauna was going out from the high Andes, time where there was a lot of changes in vegetation, and sometimes even an increase in fire frequency. I didn't show it here, but everything happens together, so it's hard. I just wanted to show to put the case of humans interacting with this fauna. That is something we haven't seen for our sites in Quebradamani, and it doesn't seem to be the case also for the high Andes.
Natalia, so caves play such an important role in sort of helping us fill out the picture of what animals were in places at different times. Are there other caves that could be looked at, or caves that have already been looked at in more detail? Do you plan to go back to caves and look at them?
So in Chile, there are no records from caves for extinct megafauna. These ones are all caves in Peru. And this one, which is in Chile, these two are in Chile, are open air sites. And this is a salt flat in the high Andes, for example, where one horse was found. And these are caves in the Andes of Peru, the same with this one. I don't know, people haven't found any remains for extinct megafauna in caves in Chile, although there have been some exploration of caves in the search of archaeological sites. Most of the work here has been done by archaeologists. Yeah, up to now. But I think it's worth exploring. I have made that question myself several times.
Well, if there are caves, there are fossils in there, so it's just almost always the case. So that would be an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah. And that's the end of my presentation. So if you have more questions or you want to talk about it.
All right. David, Chris, you guys want to bring in some questions?
I'm still looking at this last chart, and this is so much of the record of megafaunal extinctions, where you've got this really intriguing climate record and vegetation record, this really intriguing human record, and then you've got these animals that go extinct somewhere in the middle. I mean, one of the things that's really neat here is that once you have humans, it looks like they're just there. They kind of come in and they stay. It's not popping out and going back. So it looks like they're there, which is really interesting record.
I mean, these patterns, they typically show us, the way that they look is that the megafauna go extinct and then the people arrive. That's sort of the way that a lot of these look. But from a radiocarbon dating standpoint, but when we're looking at this, as the fossil record being not perfect, not that much material, would we even expect to necessarily find those first peoples and those last animals? And maybe that's something both of you could comment on.
Yeah, what I didn't mention in this graph, when you look at these like distributions, this is just an statistic method to try to cope in some way with the imperfection of the fossil record and the archaeological record. So you just place like a boundary where you probably have your first humans arriving here and your last extinct megafauna disappearing. This one was calculated only for Hipperion, which is the one that has more dates, but just 5. But yeah, according to that, they would have coexisted for some time. But at present, we don't have more evidence.
There's no smoking gun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the fun things about these things, we've been playing with dates for so long, and they get better and better, and our data sets get better and better. And so we see this overlap, and it's intriguing. I'm encouraged, by some papers that have come out that we're starting to look at the mechanisms of how these animals go extinct. So not just concerned about that chronological overlap, but really what's going on ecologically in some of these lineages as they approach extinction, which is to me, that's really exciting. And so, yeah, this is neat too, because we've got, it seems like your sloths might be going out a little bit early, but certainly your megatherium is kind of early there, and it'll be really neat as you get more of these dates kind of in the hopper.
Yeah, and this is all from one cave, so you actually have quite a long record from one side. Yeah.
Well, this is a flashy system too. If you're starting to get drier, then you could really wreak some havoc very quickly, I think, on some of these animals.
So I wonder on those ones that you were able to get radiocarbon dated that were down from the desert where people were digging roads and that sort of thing, if those were just better preserved bones because they were deeper and not exposed at the surface. And so you've got good stuff down below, you're just not seeing it at the surface.
Yeah, and so at the museum there are like 2 or 3 megatheriums, for example. 2 of them look pretty good. And I got one date for just one of them. And the other one, I tried and I tried because it looks like beautiful. I said, this one has to have collagen. And it didn't work. I tried like 5 times.
That's
so you
time
never
to stop.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5, that's
Nothing
a pretty good
left.
try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go over
All
to
right.
David. I think he has some questions.
Sure, we've got a bunch of questions coming in from the audience. So this is a reminder, if you're watching and you haven't already, go ahead and send your questions for Natalia either in the Facebook comments, or like I said, if you can't do that, go to the Gray Fossil site, Twitter or Instagram, and send us a comment there. I'm going to start. Amy has suggested that the name for horsetail you might have been trying to think of before is horsetail rush. That might have been it. And Amy also has a question. In this picture that you have up on the screen right now, what is the red curve showing? It seems to crash when the extinctions do.
Yeah, the red curve is a record for Sporormiella, which is this fungus that grows in the dung of large mammals. So it's usually used as a proxy for extinction. So in this case, this one comes from a lake in northern Peru, in the high Andes of northern Peru. And from the lake sediments, they recovered this fungus and counted and make this chart. And basically, you assume that when these levels are high, you have a high presence, or you have presence of a megafauna around the lake. And when the numbers are low, your megafauna is gone. So it's used as a proxy of extinction. And around this time here, your megafauna was probably gone from the landscape.
Very cool. That actually leads us very nicely into a question that Greg has asked. Given the arid conditions, do you get dung of mega herbivores preserved just as you do the middens?
So let me think. I know for Chile there are no records, but for some caves in Argentina there are. And actually, there are some studies of ancient DNA that seem to indicate that all they belong to the same species of ground sloth. They think it was a ground sloth. And I think the possible candidate could be the Aboletherium, which wasn't a large ground sloth, was quite big anyway. And it was a climbing one. And possibly the one living in smaller caves like Casa del Diablo that left that dung. And I'm thinking there's also some horse dung, but all of them from caves in Argentina. I don't have any record in mind for Chile. Yeah.
All right. Well, if it's ground sloth, that'll be very exciting for Greg to hear, I'm sure. Grant has asked, did the megafauna eat from the tamarugo tree?
I don't know. I didn't show it. I had a reconstruction of a giant ground sloth eating a tamarugo, and I didn't put it in my presentation. But I guess, I mean, if they were present there, and also we can imagine the Atacama as it wasn't like green everywhere. You had these corridors or these canyons where the trees were growing. But then if you walk a bit north or a bit south, it was dry in some places again. So I can imagine these animals eating what they had, and like in these conditions, you eat what you have in the landscape. And the tamarugos produce, they are legumes. So they have like, they produce these seeds, very nutritious. People still gather these seeds and eat them. So yeah, I'm sure the animals were eating part of these trees.
Natalia, do you know, have people studied the middens in very much detail in looking at paleoecology? And if so, how far back do those middens date to?
So the middens, yeah, in in Chile, we have been working with middens for a long time. That was my work as an undergrad. Studies that have been made are, they go up to the limit of the radiocarbon dating limit, so 50,000 years before present. And the studies that have been made are measuring the size of the feces to estimate changes in body size of the rodents, also identification of the plants present. So you can see how at some point, you have these middens in also what is today the absolute desert. And you can see that the middens that date back to 20,000 years before present have grasses on them. So there are estimations of how this vegetation migrated downslope from the Andes during wetter periods of time during the late Pleistocene. Some colleagues have also been trying to do some ancient DNA work in the middens. So yeah.
And do they also collect bones as well, or just plants? Do the rodents collect bones and bring those into the midden as well?
Usually the bones you find are rodent bones. Yeah, like the little guys that died there, and yeah.
All right, well, interesting.
We've got another question here that I know Blaine might be interested to hear the answer to, and I'm definitely interested. Byron asks, are there any reptile fossils in there?
Let me think. So at present, we are finding a great diversity of vertebrates coming from the deposits in the archaeological sites. So I guess you can imagine that these archaeological sites were located in a moment where you have some sort of a forest there. And I think what we might be getting are also a lot of owl pellets and things like that maybe got stuck in the side also. And we have found a lot of birds. We have had some suspicion of small lizards, but let me think. It is very possible. I was working with some colleagues on these deposits a couple of weeks ago, and we found some suspicious bones of large lizards that are still present in Pampa del Tamarugal. But yeah, that kind of stuff, no large reptiles, maybe small ones, but still a question mark, but it's possible that it will come out, yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, sounds like there may be some hidden work for paleoherpetologists to do. Lorenzo asks, do you find remains of Lestodon?
Lestodon. No, in Chile there are no records of Lestodon. No.
All right.
It's, yeah.
All right.
Now David has me thinking about the reptiles, and I'm wondering, what kinds of, do you have many lizards and snakes that are living out there today on that desert where you don't have many plants?
No, not where there are no plants. That's like nothing lives there. Sometimes you find one wandering guanaco or a fox, but that obviously is going somewhere, not living there. But in the place, as I showed, there is still some remains of this forest present, which is a national park. And in that area, you can find some lizards. I don't know if snakes, I don't think so. But there is one that is called like El Corredor del Tamarugal, like the runner of the Tamarugal of this forest, which is quite a large lizard. And you can see them there sometimes, but yeah.
So does it run on its hind legs?
No, I've seen it running in four legs. Maybe.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to come. I'll be there tomorrow.
Well, if Blaine is planning on taking a trip over there to help you with your work, then this next question will be relevant. Mason asks, what's it like doing research in Chile? what areas warrant more study in the future?
Oh. It's fun doing research in Chile. I'm gonna talk like about my personal experience, but I went like out of my country to study, to do my PhD. I stayed abroad maybe 5 or a bit more, between 5 and 6 years. And coming back has been like, there are a lot of things to do. And paleontology here in Chile is a growing community. There have been always a few paleontologists, but now there are more and more younger people coming into the field, and a lot of projects going on. Funding is hard to get, and yeah, like permanent positions are hard to get. But what I like of staying here in this country is that it seems there are a lot of things to do. And places, for example, now I'm involved in this project in the Atacama, but also in another one in central Chile. And yeah, I mean, there are fossils everywhere, and there are things to do in every place in the country, and it's fun.
That actually leads into a question that I was thinking about is, this is the Atacama Desert. It's super dry, it's super high. How is it different doing field work out there compared to, we live in East Tennessee where there's lots of water, lots of plants, that sort of thing. I mean, is it different? I assume that it's different.
Yeah, I think it's easy or easier than in other places in many ways. So, for example, you don't need water to like work in your sieves or things like that. That I've been in central Chile, that when you excavate, you get out these clays and things that have to be washed to get the bones out of it. In the Atacama, it's just sand. So you can work without water, without any problems. Of course, the heat is a problem. Usually we do field work during our winter because temperatures are more mild and it's easier to work. And in these places, we are not in the highlands. We are like 1,000 meters above sea level. So altitude is not a problem here. Sometimes collecting middens was a problem to be above 3,000 meters, and that was harder. But yeah, and also like the deposits, I've been working a lot with archaeologists. They are the ones excavating, and you dig not much, and you are in the late Pleistocene. Yeah. Like, for example, in central Chile, in one project I'm working right now, we had to excavate like 2 meters hard soil to get to the Pleistocene, to the late Pleistocene. So it's easier in some ways.
I was paying attention to the scale bar in a lot of your aerial photos, and just the scale of the landscapes that you're dealing with is they seem really big. Like you'll say, oh well, we're working over here, but down here, and it's like 50 kilometers away or 70 kilometers away. So just the scale seems to be something that is a challenge.
Yeah.
We've got a couple more questions. Maggie asks, despite the poor condition of the fossils found near the archaeological site, were there any signs of tool marks on the bones?
No signs of tool marks. There might be some signs of like chewing by carnivores maybe at some point, but no human marks or tool marks. Yeah.
All right, and we've got another question from Advait, who asks, how much of a problem is taxonomic inflation when trying to understand the megafaunal extinctions in South America?
It is a problem. It's always a problem, but yeah, there are many taxa that need to be revised, and there are some colleagues. I'm not a taxonomist, so I'm grateful for all the colleagues that are doing this amazing work in revising for example, gonfos ears, and try to understand how many species were present, or horses, for example. Is always a problem, yeah. And again, I'm grateful for the people who are working in these taxonomy groups, because we need that work. Yeah.
Yeah, I can comment on that. It's definitely really inflated, as it is everywhere originally, and it just, as time goes by and more people have the opportunity to work on them, then you refine that and typically do a lot of lumping in the end. I remember Leopoldo Soibelson, who's my colleague over in Argentina, and he did his PhD on the short-faced bears. And if I remember correctly, he started with something like 17 in South America, and 17, and then I think, got it down to just a handful of our.
Yeah, there are like 6 or 7, or maybe
there's
less
five,
than 7.
there's still 5. I think probably more like 4, but that's a different topic. So, yeah. But
But that's
more
the case with many groups in South America. Yeah.
So we've got one more audience question here. Aditya asks, are the salt flats in modern Atacama due to the Holocene climate, or were they present in the Pleistocene during drier periods?
I think it depends. For example, the Atacama salt flat, which is the large one, I think it's pretty old, or at least the onset of its formation it's old, like during the Pleistocene, or even before. I'm not sure. But other salt flats, were like shallow lakes. It depends on the lake, I would say. But not all of them are the result of Holocene climate. I'm thinking now, we just published one horse finding in a salt flat, Salar de Surire. And for that case, for example, that's a salt flat which is very, very high, above 4,000 meters in the Andes. And according to the stratigraphy of that particular case, it was a shallow lake when the horse died. And the horse died 14,000 years before present. And now it's a salt flat. So some of them are the result of the Holocene climate. And in other cases, I think they were a bit older, like the great salt flat in the Atacama.
All right. Well, if Blaine or Chris have any other questions, now's the time. I think we're just about at the end of our program time.
All right. I don't have any additional questions. Natalia, if you'll stay on just a minute afterwards here, we'll wrap it up. Thank you again for being on the show. That was fantastic. I'm ready to go.
Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome.
Now, before we wrap up today, Blaine, we've got a couple of things to share that are coming up.
That's right. That's right. We do. So if you want to show those, David?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll start with next week's Paleo Talks. We're going to give a teaser for next week. We've got, can you see that okay?
Adrian Lister. Yeah, that came up well.
Adrian Lister is going to be joining us to talk about mammoth taxonomy and DNA. So that's next Friday. We're very excited to see that. We're excited about our poster here. Includes this really cool mammoth art, which will be less covered up, I'm sure, when Adrian shares it.
For those of you who can't tell, that is 2 individuals. So it's a male and a female.
2 individuals in the hopes of creating more.
That's right.
And then we've got another special thing coming up next week. So actually the day before next week's Paleo Talks is Earth Day. And we're going to be celebrating Earth Day with this documentary called Appalachian Awakening, which was put together by our friend Mauricio Anton. The documentary is up on YouTube now where you can watch it. And on Earth Day, we're going to be having a live interview Q&A with Mauricio. So just like Paleo Talks, people can join in and submit questions. We've got the link to the YouTube video on our Facebook events. We'll be sharing it on our page over the next week. I'll go ahead and put the link here in the chat here in a second so people can watch the documentary and then hopefully join us when we talk to Mauricio next week.
That's right. And so any of you that haven't made that connection, Mauricio is the paleo artist that also did the book on saber-toothed cats. And he was our Baszler Chair of Excellence at East Tennessee State University last year. And while he was here, he took a lot of hikes with us, and in that process did some filming. And so this film is about sort of winter turning into spring. That's Appalachian Awakening. So definitely watch that. It's really, really good, and get the chance to ask questions directly to Mauricio. All right. If we don't have anything else, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And thank you so much, Natalia, for fitting us into your schedule. All right. We'll see everybody next week.
Bye.